It was a beautiful and sunny day at ESHS, and all the teachers were getting their rooms ready for the new year. Miss Everett walked into the building just ahead of Mr. Meyer, who had arrived to dominate the day, and made her way to the office. She was greeted by Cassandra and Renee, who told her there had been reports of an animal loose in the building. An animal? Mr. Tarnowski immediately came to mind, so she headed that way. She found Mr. T busy setting up his 8th coffee machine, but Max the snake was safely in his cage, so that couldn't be it. Just then, her radio crackled to life, and Miss Miller said the animal had been spotted in the back hall. Miss Everett dashed that way, passing Miss Houck, who was setting up her latest James Patterson display in the library window. But there was no animal in sight. Miss Everett popped into the fax classroom to see if it was there, but Miss Mercer had been busy crocheting a cozy for her passport and hadn't seen anything. Suddenly, there was a big crash down the hall, and Miss Everett raced to find Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden wrestling to prove who was stronger, but no animals were in sight. "Miss Everett, it's in the 20s hall," came Mr. Schwab's voice over the intercom, so she headed that way. She found some strange tracks that led her past Miss Reeves and Miss Spain decorating their classrooms in matching red, white, and blue, and past Miss Alexander hanging up her vast collection of Batman posters. She followed the tracks down to the 40s hall, past Fabian working out in the fitness center, and towards the sound of Mr. Harlan singing this year's choir tunes. Still, no animals. "Miss Everett, we've spotted the animal in the PAC, heading there now," came Mr. Marshall's voice over the radio, and Miss Everett ran as fast as she could, bursting through the doors of the PAC where she expected to find Mr. Haney choreographing the new musical. But instead, she found a big group of students on the stage, decked out in their tiger gear, waiting to surprise the teachers. The students let out a huge cheer, and all the teachers were so excited to see their students. We miss all of our tigers, and we can't wait to see you again.
It was a beautiful and sunny day at ESHS, and all the teachers were returning to get their classrooms ready for the new school year. Mrs. Everett walked in ahead of Mr. Meyer, who was ready to dominate the day, and she walked into the office and was told by Cassandra and Renee that there was an animal loose in the building. She saw Mr. T walk by, and they checked his classroom, but all the animals were in their cages in her room, so it wasn't him. Next, she went down to the library to see Mrs. Houck, who was getting her next presentation ready, but there was nothing going on in the library. Then she went down to the fax room, but Mrs. Mercer was crocheting a bag for her passport and had not seen a thing. All of a sudden, she heard a loud crash and bang, and ran down the hallway to see Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden wrestling to see who was stronger. Then she heard someone yell, "It's in the 20s hallway." So she ran down to the 20s hallway to see Miss Reeves and Miss Spain doing something, but there was no animal. So she heard a crackling on the radio. It was Mr. Marshall. He was saying that there was some commotion coming from the pack. So she ran down and burst through the doors, expecting to see Mr. Haney choreographing his newest play, but instead there were all the students standing up on the stage in tiger outfits, ready to welcome back all the teachers, and all the teachers were happy to see their students. Students, we miss you, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
It was a bright and beautiful day at Excelsior Springs High School. The staff was coming back, excited to start the new year. Miss Everett walked ahead of Coach Meyer, who was ready to dominate. As Miss Everett entered the office, Cassandra and Renee let her know that there was an animal loose in the building. Since Mr. Teagarden was right there, they went to his room to check it out and saw all the animals were good in their cages. Then they heard a noise down in the fax room, so they went down there and saw Miss Mercer crocheting a bag for her passport. Loud noises got her attention again, and so she headed down the hall where they were coming and saw Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden wrestling, trying to see who was the toughest. Oh, and then they saw there were no animals. So they went into the library, and Miss Houck and asked Miss Hauk about it. And she said, I don't think she said anything. And so, but the noises were heard down in the 20s hallway. So they went down to the 20s hallway where Miss Reese and Miss Spain were doing something that, not sure what that was, but there were no animals. Then Miss Everett decided, check the theater. So she went down to the theater and busted through the doors thinking she would see Mr. Haney preparing for a theater production. But instead, she saw all the students up on the stage dressed as tigers, ready to welcome the staff back. Students, we miss you, and we hope you are having a wonderful year. Bye.
So it was the beginning of a new year, and everybody was so ready to be back at school. The staff was all returning, and everybody was so excited. And Mrs. Everett and Mr. Meyer were the two first people into the building, or so they thought. So they were walking in together. Mr. Meyer was totally ready to dominate the year. But when they walked in, Cassandra and Renee told them that there were animals loose in the building. And so they ran out and checked the animals, but all of the animals were in their cages. So they were walking around and they heard a noise from the fax room, and they went down there, and Miss Mercer was crocheting a bag for her passport. And so they thought, okay, well, that's not where the noise is coming from. So they went out. And down the hall, they saw Mr. Teagarden and Mr. Padilla wrestling in the hallway, trying to see who was the toughest teacher of them all. But that wasn't the noise that they'd heard either. So then they heard something coming from the 20s hallway. So they went down there to investigate, and Mrs. Reeves and Mrs. Spain were doing something, but that wasn't the noise they heard either. So they walked out again, and they walked down to the PAC because they thought, well, maybe it's Mr. Haney and his students preparing for some kind of production. So they went down there, and what they saw just made their hearts leap. They saw all of the students wearing tiger costumes on the stage, ready to welcome back the staff. We missed you guys. We can't wait to see you, Tigers. We hope you're enjoying your break, and we will see you very, very soon.
So it was the beginning of a brand new school year, and everybody was so ready to come back to school. So ready. Everybody, the students, the staff, all of us were so excited. Miss Everett and Mr. Meyer were so thrilled to be back in the building. They thought that they were the first ones back in the building. But when they walked in, they got to the office and they saw that Cassandra and Renee were there, and someone had said that they had let all of the animals loose. So Mr. Meyer and Miss Everett, they ran out of the office and they went and checked on the animals, and all of the animals were still in their cages. But they heard this really, really loud noise and they weren't sure where it was coming from. So they went on a hunt to find where the noise was coming from. So the first place they went to was the fax room. And when they got to the fax room, they saw Miss Mercer was in her room crocheting a bag for her passport. So that wasn't what made the noise. Then they went and down to towards the 10s hallway, and they saw that Mr. Teagarden and Mr. Padilla were wrestling in the hallway. They were trying to figure out who was the toughest of them all. But that wasn't the noise that they heard either. So then they went down to the 20s hallway, and they found Miss Reeves and Miss Spain working in their classroom. So that wasn't the noise that they heard either. So then they decided that they heard some noises again, and they went down to the PAC. And when they got to the PAC, they thought that maybe Mr. Haney was preparing for some production. He was already getting to work on some play or something. So, but when they got there, they just were very confused. At first, when they walked in, they were expecting to see again Mr. Haney working on something, and instead, their heart just did the biggest leap in the world. Okay, when they walked in, all of the students were all wearing tiger gear and tiger costumes, and they were all on the stage to welcome all of the staff back to the school for the school year. We are all so excited to see you again. We miss you guys. Have a great summer, and we cannot wait to see you during the next school year. Bye.
Hi guys, I'm here to tell you a little story that I heard today. It was the first day back of a new school year, and I entered the building and Mr. Meyer was with me, and we were super excited because we thought we were the first people to enter the building. So we walked into the office and we were confused because we saw Renee and Cassandra sitting there. So we were a little bit curious as to what was going on, and all of a sudden we heard a bunch of loud noises, and someone had said someone had let all of the animals loose. So we got worried. So Mr. Meyer and I went down to check on the animals, and we found that they were all safe and sound. So we decided to go look around the building and see what was up. So the first place we checked was the fax room, and Miss Mercer was in there just crocheting her little heart away on a book for her passport. So we concluded that could not have been the noises that we heard. So we decided to make our way back down that back hallway, and where we ran into Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden wrestling, trying to determine which one of them was the strongest man. So we just let that go and kept walking and went up the 20s hallway, and we saw Miss Reeves and Miss Spain, and they were in there working on curriculum. So we knew that wasn't the noise that we heard. So we just kept walking and ended up finally making our way down to the PAC, and we thought we heard some noises there, and we thought, well, that's maybe Mr. Haney in there working with his students on some awesome performance. So we walked in there and were confused because we didn't see anything at the beginning. And when we rounded the corner, we saw students up on stage just cheering. Everybody was in tiger gear and everyone was super excited, ready to surprise the staff and welcome everybody back for a new school year. So can't wait to see everybody, and I hope you enjoyed our story. Thanks.
Hey guys, I just heard a really funny story about the first day of school, and apparently Mr. Meyer and Miss Everett thought they were the first to enter the building, but when they went into the office they were super confused because of course there was Renee and Cassandra sitting there in the office, and then all of a sudden they heard this loud noise and they couldn't figure out what could that be, and somebody came by the office and said, "The animals are loose. Somebody let all the animals loose." And so, of course, they would be super worried. And so they went down the hall, like the science hall, to check on the animals, and they were all safe and sound. So I'm not sure why somebody said the animals were loose, but the animals were all okay. But they still continue to hear some noise, so they decided to go around the school to look around. So they headed toward the back hallway, and first they looked in the fax room, and there was Miss Mercer just crocheting along, and she was crocheting a cover for her passport, maybe? I've never seen a crocheted cover for a passport, but apparently that's what she was doing. And so the noise wasn't coming from her because that's really quiet except for the click, clack, click, click of the crochet needles. So they decided, nope, noise can't be coming from here. So they went on down the back hallway and came upon Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden, who were wrestling. I don't know if they were in a room wrestling or in the hallway. It's kind of weird either way. Trying to prove who's the strongest. So, although there was probably some grunting and some noise going on there, they decided and determined that is not the noise for which they were searching. So they turned and they went down the 20s hallway to search there. They looked in and saw Miss Reeves and Miss Spain working on curriculum. That's not noisy, so that couldn't be the source of the noise. So they continued on their search and headed toward the pack. they figured maybe the pack would be the place to have a lot of noise. And so they go to the pack. Maybe Mr. Haney had something going on down there that was getting a little noisy. They went into the pack and again were very confused because although they had heard noise coming from the pack, there was nobody there. And so they kind of looked at each other. They're like, what is going on? And then some students came on stage and started cheering and were super excited for the first day of school, getting everybody fired up and excited to finally be back in the building. And so that is, to my knowledge, the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed.
Hey guys, just wanted to share a little story that I heard about the first day of school. Mr. Meyer and Miss Everett were the first ones to school that morning, but they walked in and they got up to the office and Cassandra and Renee were there, so they were not the first people at school that day. But while in the office, they heard all these noises that sounded like animals running around the building. So they decided to go look and check and see what the noise was. And so when they walked out into the hallway, they checked on all the animals, and the animals were safe and sound. So they weren't making any noise, so they don't know where the sound came from. So they decided to walk down the hallway, and they were walking in the back hallway. They stopped at the fax room, and Mrs. Mercer was in there crocheting a cover for her passport. Well, that doesn't make a lot of noise, and so they knew the sound wasn't coming from there. So they decided to go further down the back hallway and ran into Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden, who were wrestling, having a competition to see who was the toughest, which we all know neither one of them would win that one. Anyway, that wasn't part of the story, but I wanted to add that anyway. But still, not a lot of noise there. So they proceeded down the 20s hallway. They walked in and saw Miss Reeves and Miss Spain working on curriculum, and that doesn't make a lot of noise, so they still didn't know where all this noise was coming from. So they decided to walk to the pack, thinking maybe that's where all of this noise is coming from. So they got inside the pack, thinking maybe that a performance was going on or something, but when they walked in there, there was no one there. And so they were really confused, wondering where this noise could have come from. But as they were sitting there, a bunch of students came out onto the stage and started singing with excitement about being back in the building for the first day of school. And I think that's all from the story. So that's what the sound was.
Hey guys, so I have a little story to tell you that I heard about the first day of school that I thought you guys would like. So, first day of school, first ones in the building are our principals, Miss Everett and Mr. Marshall. And they come in and they hear all this noise, like animals and just ruckus. And so they come in and go into the office and they realize they're not the first ones there, that Miss Cassandra and Renee are. So they kind of talk to them, like, wondering if where these noises are coming from. And so then they start going around the building looking for this. So the first place they go is to the back hallway and go to Miss Mercer's classroom. I think maybe it's coming from there. And she's just in there. So she's just crocheting a little cover for her passport, so that doesn't make much noise. So they knew the noise wasn't coming from there. So they keep going down, and then they see Mr. Teagarden and Mr. Padilla practicing what we would think is wrestling moves, I guess. And wasn't them. They weren't being as loud as what this ruckus was coming from. And so then they keep making their ways around, and they go to the 20s, and see Miss Spain and Miss Reeves and go in there. They realize they're not the ones making the noise, so then they keep going around the building and they make it all the way down to the pack. And they go in there, it's dark, come into the pack, and all of a sudden they see all these students. And so all the kids are on the stage and they're so excited and happy, and they have this whole little thing that they've put together for the first day of school to show their excitement. Because you guys are missing school just as much as we are. So that sounds like a cool first day of school. But I think that's all the story. I probably messed it up. But we miss you guys.
So I've got a little story to tell you about the first day of school. It was first day of school. The administrators were the first ones to show up, like you would expect. Miss Everett, Mr. Marshall, Miss Miller were all coming into the building, and they could hear some strange, really loud noises going on in the building. Didn't know if it was animals or where it was even coming from. So they went ahead into the building and started to investigate where that noise could be coming from, and they thought they were the first ones in the building, so they didn't think it could be any people. But they went into the office and found Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Miles were already there, and they didn't know where the noise was coming from either. And so the administrators went on and continued their investigating of where this might be coming from, and they headed down the hall, thought it might be in the back hallway somewhere. So they went down toward Miss Mercer's room and went in, and it was just Miss Mercer in the room, and she wasn't making that much noise. She was just doing some crocheting. Maybe, I think they said crocheting a cover for her passport so she could do some more traveling, I guess. So they left there and headed on down the hallway, still trying to follow the noise, and ran into Mr. Padilla and Mr. Teagarden. And they were not making that much noise, just, practicing some wrestling moves and whatnot there in the hallway. And so they continued on their travels, went back down toward the 20s hallway, where they ran into Miss Spain and Miss Reeves. And they were kind of the same way, looking around trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. So they all started to continue to follow. Finally decided maybe all the noise was coming from down toward the PAC. So they headed toward the PAC, and it was getting louder as they got there. So they entered into the back doors of the PAC, and they found all these kids celebrating, having a good time, and all fired up for a big first day of school, returned back to the action. So it's a pretty exciting first day, and hope things are going well for you guys, and looking forward to seeing all of you again real soon.